Hey everyone, welcome to season 11 of the Tension Podcast. We're a show that acknowledges most of life and faith is lived in the tension between the two extremes. Each week we take a look at what many of us were taught growing up in evangelical churches. We weigh it against what our current culture is saying, and we try to find what Jesus has for us in the tension between the two. If we haven't met, my name is Jonathan Carone, and we're joined as always by our co-host, Mr. Eric Williams. Eric, go ahead and say hey to the people.
What's up? I like poking the bear, and this season feels like another poke the bear season, and I'm here for it.
I like making fun of us too, though. And so I'm going to bring up something we were talking about in the pre-show. Eric,
Okay.
You're a grown man playing grown man softball.
Yeah.
And what's your biggest claim to fame right now?
Right now we are ranked number one in the nation in our
number
division.
one, baby.
In the nation, baby.
The number one men's softball league or team.
That's like when you find
in your classification, in your
classification.
administrative body in the nation.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's like all the youth sports world champions. This is the 10U World National Championship, and then that's the 10U World Classic National Championship. Wood bat something.
It's the USSSA Men's D League National Champion.
Number one in the country, baby.
Number one in the country, ranked number one. So it means about as much as like the media poll from the NCAA in like 1992. Nobody cares.
But hey, I'm proud of you. Hey,
no big deal. Yeah, that's good. I mean, I'm old enough to play in senior ball, and I still play with all the kids out there. I need more gear and more aftercare, but that's all right. You know, I'm buying stock in ibuprofen at this point.
Today's episode is sponsored by ibuprofen for when you get old and still try to play sports.
And lidocaine. Ibuprofen and lidocaine. That's right.
Hey, if you're new with us, this season we're looking at the idea that cultural Christianity is killing the American church. 2 weeks ago, we introduced this idea and went into all the definitions so you could see where we're coming from. Last week, we talked about how there's no place for moderates in the American evangelical church and how moderates have kind of been pushed out. This week, we're going to talk about how the cultural Christian language surrounding abortion is making church something that isn't appealing to a lot of people.
Yep.
As a refresher, though, before we get into that, we define cultural Christians in two ways. First way is spiritually immature Christians who have been discipled more by evangelical culture than the actual Bible. The second definition is Christians who are more concerned with applying their Christian preferences to the culture than they are in achieving unity in Christ with those who may have different preferences. If you want to hear more about what those mean and deal with that, go listen to those first two episodes because those are the ones that we really get into the nuts and bolts of that. Before we get in today, if you like our show, please leave us a rating wherever you listen or watch. If you listen to Apple Podcasts, that'd be a huge help if you wrote up a small review. If you're on YouTube and watching us, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that like button on today's video. Okay.
Perfect.
All that stuff's out of the way now. We can get into the good stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I would say first, before we go into the good stuff, I want to remind people the definition of cultural Christianity is what we are going with when we're talking about this stuff. So as you start to get triggered and think cultural Christianity, make sure that you are evaluating what we are saying based on our definition. You can call it whatever you want, but this is the word we are using to be a stand-in for those two definitions.
Yep. And as we get into the season more and more, it's going to get more and more nuanced, and there'll be different pieces of this. Next week is super nuanced that we'll get into then. But for today, we're going to get into some bigger talking points here in a minute, but I think I need to set the scene for you so that, again, just like Eric said, so we need to be all on the same page before we can continue a conversation. If we're coming from different places and we're talking about two different things, we're never going to see eye to eye. But if we can set the stage for you, then you can see what we're trying to talk about here. If you've been in the evangelical or fundamentalist bubble for too long, you might think one of two things. You might think that someone in church would never consider getting an abortion, or you might think that someone who has had an abortion would never consider wanting to go to church. And both of those thoughts are fundamentally and factually wrong. They're just not true. According to Focus on the Family, a highly pro-life organization, more than 4 in 10 women who have had an abortion were churchgoers when they ended the pregnancy.
Oh.
4 in 10 were attending church regularly when they had their abortion. On top of that, 70% of women who had an abortion claim a Christian religious preference. 7 in 10 claim to be Christian. And 43% report attending church monthly or more at the time of the abortion.
Hmm.
So it is a fact that women who have had an abortion or women will have one in the future are oftentimes church going, Christ following women.
Yep.
And because this is an important part of this conversation, the men who were their partners in the situation are often church going men as well. So the people who are impacted the most by abortion conversations and abortion language are the people who are sitting in the pews with us in church.
Yeah. So, couple of things on that. One is I think it's yeah, those numbers. I mean, they don't shock me, but it's like when you read them again and again and again, you start to see this picture of an issue that it's like we're just not talking about it in the right way, because we're saying things from the pulpit or we're saying things from social media without understanding that there are people in your congregation that are impacted by this. They've either had an abortion or they know somebody that has. There's no doubt right now. So to stand on like a moral high horse or high ground to say that abortion, especially when it comes to politics, is like the one issue you're voting on. uh, I think it just needs some more examination, which is why I think this conversation is so important.
And that's the big idea for today. It's the language and culture around abortion by cultural Christians is pushing people who have had their lives impacted by an abortion, both male and female, away from the church.
Yep.
And again, I want to show you the data here so you know that this isn't just, hey, Jonathan did an episode about being pro-choice, so now he's going to dog everybody who might not be pro-choice. No, that's not the case here. I've told you before, I respect you if you're pro-life. This is a place where we can differ and still follow Jesus together. But the data from Focus on the Frickin' Family
Yep.
shows that this isn't my bias bringing this up. It says 2/3, around 65% of women who have had an abortion say church members judge single women who are pregnant. 65% of 65% of women who have had an abortion say church members judge single women who are pregnant. 54%, still a majority, of women who have had an abortion think churches oversimplify decisions about pregnancy options. Less than half of women who have had abortions, only 41%, believe churches are prepared to deal with the decisions about unwanted pregnancies. 41% believe churches are prepared to deal with decisions about unwanted pregnancies. Only 3 in 10 think churches give accurate advice about pregnancy options. So to flip that, 7 of 10 women who have had an abortion think churches give inaccurate advice about pregnancy options. 54% say they would not recommend a friend or family member discuss an unplanned pregnancy with someone at church. So more than half of the women who have had an abortion say they would not recommend a friend or family member discuss their unplanned pregnancy with someone in church. And here's the kicker for me when it comes to how unsafe women feel in these situations. Only 7% of women who have had an abortion discussed their decision with anyone at church, not just a pastor, anyone.
Yeah.
Only 7% of women, and remember, we said earlier that 70% of women who had an abortion claim a Christian religious preference, and what was it, 50 something? No, 4 in 10 were actively going to church, but only 7% of women talked to anyone at their church about their abortion before it happened.
Huh. That is a huge problem. That's a huge problem. I remember, and I'm probably going to quote this wrong, but I think it was Reggie Joyner If it wasn't Reggie Joiner, it was somebody else at some other Christian conference I went to. Um, and the speaker was talking about God the Father, right? And there was a typical analogy, and this might just be a cliche story that everybody tells at some point, right? But he's bringing up this example of his kid who, his teen, who's driving. I don't remember all the details, but essentially the story goes, kid was driving either out past curfew or speeding or got in an accident, something where it was like, oh crap, my life is over, right? And the big analogy was like, he was glad that his son trusted him enough to call him to say, like, yeah, I screwed up. I need my dad, right? I think we've seen that meme on Christian Facebook. You probably had one of your aunts share it on there at some point, right? It's like, instead of, oh, I screwed up, my dad's going to kill me, or I screwed up, I need my dad. Like, that was the two big differences. And I think if you grew up in I screwed up, my dad's going to kill me house, you know what this is like, as opposed to, I screwed up. Yeah, my parents are probably going to be really upset, but boy, I need my dad to help me, right? And this is what the type of parenting / how we view God situation in the Bible is like. I have a really big thing that I'm confused about. Not an I've screwed up, because I don't even want to like do any sort of shaming on pregnancy or any of that stuff. But like, I've got a big decision. Don't you, as a parent,
Something happened that I wasn't expecting.
sure, or even a big dilemma, like I've got a decision to make, don't you hope that you raise your kids to the point where they go, he may not be the only person that I consult, but I need to consult dad. I need to know what dad says, right? I need to know what mom thinks about this. As a parent, I know I want my kids. They may have other people. They may have other counsel, but when they grow up, and
I
even
hope
as
they
a
have other people in other council.
right. Yeah. But like teens and adults, I want them to feel safe enough to go, it doesn't matter how embarrassing this might be. I need to ask, dad what he thinks about this. I need some help. And if your church has essentially established an environment where your people do not feel safe when they have a moral dilemma or something unexpected or or even a question, right? It's like, why can't you go to the church? Oh, because they're going to shame me. They're going to tell me this. They're going to tell me that. And even that, all that stuff may not be true. And again, we've talked about this plenty of times. We both worked on the inside of churches. I've worked on the inside of churches. I've been in rooms where the lead pastor has been like flabbergasted. I'm like, oh, well, how come people think this about us? And how about it? And like, remember thinking like, yeah, it's because of the way that we portray ourselves and because of what we're saying that people don't trust us, or that people feel like they can't come to us, or they'll leave, they'll like Irish goodbye the church, and they'll just leave without saying anything or talking to anybody or whatever. It's like, wow, you couldn't trust us to do that. Then all of a sudden we go, oh, that must be a them problem. No, that's an us problem, especially if you say only 7% discussed it with anyone in their church. That could be your small group leader. That could be whoever. Like, that's crazy to me. Not, I mean, again, it's sad. It's not crazy. I expect it. It's not crazy. I didn't think it would be that low, but not unexpected.
And I think the part that sticks out to me about that number is I can understand to an extent not wanting to talk to a pastor, because I mean, pastors can be intimidating. Pastors can be, you don't have a relationship with a pastor, whatever it might be. But to not feel comfortable with anyone in your church to have that conversation, like,
Yeah.
you don't have a friend in the church that you feel safe enough to have that conversation. Only 7% of women felt safe enough to have a conversation with the same group of people that they go eat Mexican food with when they leave church.
Yep.
Only 7% of people felt comfortable enough to have a conversation with the same people they see in the grocery store that they happen to go to church with.
Hmm.
Like, I have never been in that situation. I have never had to have those conversations on my behalf or my partner's behalf.
Right.
But I would hope, if I'm following Jesus and being led by him, that my life would represent him in a way that someone in a crisis situation would feel comfortable coming to me.
Right.
They may know that I might disagree with them, but the biggest compliment I was ever given, I don't want to turn this into a thing about me, but this is what I'm talking about to an extent. I had someone tell me, this was a person who was not raised in church, did not know much about religion, and they had some questions. I knew them. They were a teacher at my kid's daycare, and um, they started asking a fellow teacher at the daycare some questions about church and religion and stuff like that. And that teacher said, "Hey, you should go ask Jonathan because he's going to be able to answer your questions. He's not going to judge you when you ask him." And I would hope we could all have that reputation when it comes to this topic. Hey, you should go talk to whoever because they might not agree with you, but they're going to love you no matter what, and they're going to answer your questions with respect and dignity and honor. But only 7% of women feel comfortable enough having those conversations. And it's based off the things that we are saying and posting in the church, or people in the church are saying and posting, and what we're calling people who have been in that situation, and the lack of empathy around it, the lack of understanding around it. Like, what was the number here? 54% think churches oversimplify the decisions about pregnancy options.
Yep.
To me, that says that the church at large, again, I'm generalizing here, so maybe not your church, maybe not all churches, but a lot of churches don't understand what people are going through when they're in this situation. And they think it's a binary, easy choice to make.
Yep.
And if you've ever been around this conversation or anyone who has had to go through the situation, you know it's anything but binary.
Yeah. I think this is why it's so important, the way that we talk about different situations. And um, I almost hesitate to say that too, because that almost seems like you're policing your words as opposed to actually changing your heart. So just with that caveat in there, like, I'm not advocating for like, oh, we'll just talk differently, right? You actually have to change how you feel. But I think this is what it exposes when you're talking about certain situations, like, um, and again, I'm going to bring in the political stuff, right? That's me, and that's the season that we're in. But think about, from a conservative standpoint, when you talk about the physical features of someone that has a different viewpoint from you. How many racist things were said by Christians about Barack Obama? How many just nasty, misogynistic things were said about Hillary Clinton? Now, was I a Hillary Clinton fan? No. But am I going to spew out sexist, misogynist stuff because I didn't like her policies? Of course not. Same thing is happening right now with Kamala Harris. And it's like, when you talk about women, when you talk about minorities, when you talk about whatever it is, like moral, the other side of a moral issue, as if that person is bad, right? Or as if that person is evil. Now, all of a sudden, you are seen as like, well, it's just not safe for me to talk about this here. It's not safe for me to bring this here. This is not my experience again as a middle class, middle aged white man. But like, if hearing experiences from minorities, and you just know that it's like, well, I just know I can't go in certain areas of this town. I know I can't talk about certain things. I know I can't do this. I can't do that because it's not safe. I can't talk to certain people about these things. It's like, wow. It's one thing when that's in our society as a whole. It's another thing when that's what the church is known for. Something happened to me. I mean, let's go the most extreme right wing scenario here. Okay. Woman was assaulted against her will, right? Was brutalized, whatever. Now is pregnant, needs to make a decision. And it's like, oh man, can't even bring that up at all. Because it's like, I I can't tell anybody. Like the worst, not the
Or hey,
one
let
of
me
the
interrupt you real
worst
quick, Eric.
situations in your entire life, and it's like I cannot go to the church with this.
I think it's an important distinction here. I think cultural Christians and that type of church would say, no, she could absolutely bring it up here. Like we would love her, and we would have those conversations. She can bring it up here, but she feels like she can't.
Sure. Yep.
And that feeling is something that I think we have to acknowledge, because people make decisions based on the things that they feel, and feelings are real.
Yep.
So even if you feel like your church is doing something different, or if you feel like you're not that person that you would be part of the ones that they could have the conversation with, they obviously feel, they being the people who are impacted the most, the women who are pregnant and their partners, if it was a consensual um, act, which in Eric's example was not. So that partner wasn't a partner. He was an
Right.
abuser. He has no
Right.
say in this.
Right.
Just saying those things so that we're all on the same page here.
Yep.
But the people involved are the ones who feel like they cannot go because they feel like they are unsafe. And you cannot tell someone they are safe and make them believe you. You
Correct.
have to show people they are safe.
Yep.
You have to act it out. And so with that in mind, Eric, finish what you were saying, but I wanted to make sure, like, no one's like, well, they can come talk to me. Well, they feel like they can't, and there's a reason for that. And so, Eric, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I love that distinction because there is this bit of pearl clutching that we get into when it's like, why would they feel that way? I don't know. Oh my gosh! And then all of a sudden, we become the victim instead of actually reaching out with empathy and saying, okay, maybe there's something within me that I need to change. Because they're all the time, like I would get this when in the church. There's like a volunteer wouldn't show up for a while or wouldn't leave or whatever, and then all of a sudden there would be a letter or somebody would say, "Oh yeah, I haven't seen Joe in so long. What happened?" And it's like they reach out and it's like, yeah, nobody talked to me at the church. I didn't feel like I was welcomed and whatever. And it could just be an honest disagreement or, honest mistake or whatever. But then on the internal, the reaction was, oh, I can't believe people just walk away without saying anything. Why wouldn't some blah, blah, blah? It's because of all the stuff that you've been saying and the way that you act in other situations that cause these people to feel like you are not safe. You are not safe. Safe is not a fact. Safe is a feeling. And for all of the facts don't care about your feelings crowd, remember, safety doesn't give a crap about your facts. Safety depends on your feelings. And if you want your congregation, your people, anybody, you want the lost, quote unquote, to feel safe in your church so they can learn about your facts, then you need to care about their feelings. And in here, there's obviously something that we are doing wrong as a church that is not making women or people who have this sort of moral dilemma, whatever families, whatever you want to call, anybody involved, they do not feel safe bringing it into church because we have taken this cultural Christianity piece and we've made the topic of abortion, we've made even the topic of women's health care or women's agency over their own bodies into a single issue voting platform. That you would think that abortion is the unforgivable sin, the way that we talk about it as in cultural Christianity. So tell me, do you think that people would feel safe coming to you or your church with the way that you talk about things like abortion or the political spectrum that is supporting women and supporting women's healthcare and women's ability to self manage their own bodies? If your conversation is calling them evil, right? Friend of the show, Mark Driscoll, love his content on that, right? Calling them evil, calling them demons, calling them anything else like that. It's like, of course, I'm not coming to you when I have a problem or a dilemma in this area because you've already made it clear that your view is more important than your relationship with anybody else. When we do not see that in the Bible, Jesus prioritizes relationship before bringing into anything with view.
calling someone a baby murderer doesn't make them want to come to church.
Yeah.
Calling someone a baby murderer doesn't make them feel safe around us.
Yeah.
And I say us because the predominant makeup of the pro-life crowd is Christians. And within that subset of Christians are these cultural Christians that feel they have to fight so hard for the unborn that the way they fight doesn't matter. And because of that, they stoop to name calling. They stoop to all these places that make women feel unsafe.
Yep.
And I'll bring up an anecdote here that I think about a lot in this conversation. I work there when I worked at the church in Tennessee. There was a ministry that kind of was aside. Like we were connected. They weren't out of our church, but we were who hosted them and supported them the most. And the ministry was they hold retreats all across the country for women and men to help them experience freedom and healing from the guilt after being involved in an abortion. And a couple of years ago, I met with them because I was redoing their website for them, and so I met with their leadership in this at one of the leaders' homes for an entire day to figure out the messaging we wanted to use around this ministry so that we could connect with the most people. Because again, there's so much connected to this that's language based, and we wanted to make sure we were saying the right thing. And this was in the summer of 2022, right when all of the is when the rumors of Roe being overturned started to come out. So it wasn't fully overturned yet, but it was getting there. And the leaders of this ministry, which is led primarily by women who have I think I'm right when I say this, so I apologize if I'm not. I'm fairly certain that everyone on their board has had an abortion at some point in their life.
Yeah.
And so they're absolutely pro-life, but they've been impacted by abortion in ways that most people in the church haven't. So they have a different perspective. They told me that they were concerned about the things that had already started being said in churches and in Christian spaces because of the triggers they'd have for people who had been impacted by abortion. And we got into this conversation. I hadn't thought, like, you know, when you're not impacted by something personally, you don't necessarily think about things all the time and like the way it impacts others. And I've always tried to choose my words carefully around that, but I've never thought about the woman on the other side who hears that language and how they feel. But these women who lead this ministry, they were intimately aware of how that made them feel because they had an abortion themselves, but they also work with people all the time who have been impacted by that. It wasn't too long after that their president wrote a blog post about this, and I went and looked it up this week so I could share it because I knew we'd get into this at some point. But in the blog post, she wrote this: all around us are people with abortion-wounded hearts. We don't know who they are, but they are there, sitting in the same pew as us, in the grocery store, in our small groups, everywhere. As 2022 unfolds and Roe v. Wade is being overturned and the abortion battle pivots to the states, please be aware that millions of abortion-wounded people are cringing with every newscast. Most don't even know there is a way out of their pain and shame. Most believe that God wants nothing to do with them or that his gift of forgiveness and healing is too good to be true. For every abortion-wounded person that is, quote, shouting out their abortion, there are millions that we will never see or hear from because they live in secret, silent torment. Remember this: even if abortion is not your story, it's the story of someone you love. And what stuck out to me, that still sticks out to me in that blog post, is where she wrote, please be aware that millions of abortion-wounded people are cringing with every newscast. Most believe God wants nothing to do with them or that his gift of forgiveness and healing is too good to be true. And so take that, what these women who work with abortion wounded women and men in their ministry all the time, they know intimately that this is the way people feel. Yet 70% of the people who are involved in an abortion claim to be a Christian preference in religion. 40% are actively going to church when they have the abortion.
Yep.
But yet they feel like God's forgiveness and healing is too good for them or isn't accessible to them. And when I hear those two things next to each other, I can't help but ask the question, what are we doing or saying that is making them not understand that Jesus loves them no matter what? That any type of decision like this is not unforgivable, that Jesus wants a relationship with them regardless of what they do in this situation. That doesn't say just go do whatever you want. We don't sin for the sake of sinning just so grace can get bigger. We don't do that. But we also don't forget or project onto other people that an action separates them from the love of God.
Yep.
Because it doesn't. And if they're not feeling safe based on the things that we're saying as Christians, we got to repent from that because that's wrong.
Yeah. Think about the groundwork that has been laid, whether intentional or unintentional. And I'm just gonna one of my values is I want to give the benefit of the doubt to people. I want to be the type of person that gives the benefit of the doubt and assumes the best intentions. So let's say this groundwork wasn't intentional, but it is a byproduct. Now all of a sudden, if someone within the church is saying we need to make the church the safest place for people to bring their doubts and their sins and their hurts what's the celebrate recovery, hurts, hangups, and habits, or something like that. Like, you need to be the safest place on the planet to bring your questions. Well, now all of a sudden, that's a liberal idea. What, we want to create a safe space in the church? The church isn't safe. Jesus turned over the tables and whips, and think about C.S. Lewis and Jesus the Lion says, is he safe? No, but is he good? Yes. Blah blah blah. We're gonna bring all that stuff back in, and it's like, I gotta tell you, at some
Out
point,
of context.
Yeah, out of context. At some point, it's almost like Inside Out. If you watch Inside Out or Inside Out 2, and it's like that anxiety bubble is just spinning around and around and around, and you're like, you don't even realize what you are doing with all of these pieces. It's like, stop. How come people have such a change of heart when it's like, oh, now all of a sudden someone close to you is affected by whatever situation? Like, I think I've shared on the podcast before. I'll admit, when I was in high school and college and post-college, one of the words I would say all of the time as a filler word, as a derogatory term, was the R word. Everything was retarded. Sorry for saying that. Everything was that. And then guess what? Now I have a special needs son. So you know what jokes aren't funny to me anymore? Those jokes. You know what's not funny to me anymore? When 12-year-old boys and 13-year-old that coach, or that are my kids' friends, when they start making the sounds of mocking people with disabilities. That's not funny to me anymore. Why? Because now I'm personally impacted by somebody with a neurological delay. And it's so sad that it takes something like that to wake people up. And even then, you will see, again, because there are people sitting in the pews. You probably have pastors that are you definitely have them, because we have the scandals that come out later, right? That they are the most adamant against certain actions and activities of people, or certain actions and activities of the things that are happening in their congregation. And then guess what happens? Oh, there's an allegation about this or that, or it comes out that they had a family member that did this or that. And it's like, maybe if you spent more time being the type of person that people in general want to be around, and you spent more time creating a space in your church and a culture in your church where people who are struggling knew that it was the safest place possible, we wouldn't be in this situation. Because, man, wouldn't it be great if in the American evangelical church, if somebody said, you know what, we have a problem, whatever that problem is, we need to get the church involved. Who would be great to weigh in on this is the church. And that idea right now is like laughable to me. Like I wish it was true, but I bet our audience, anyone, I bet if you polled a bunch of people and you said, when it comes to the issue of abortion, one of the main voices we need to hear from is evangelical leaders. I mean, laughable. When it comes to the issue of adultery, one of the main voices we need to hear from is evangelical leaders. Laughable. When it comes to the issue of, like name whatever, financial, I don't know what you want to call it, like stealing, embezzlement, whatever, right? Financial abuse. One of the leading voices we need to hear from is an evangelical leader. I would say the majority of the country would say, of course not. When it comes to women's reproductive rights, any of that stuff, why? Why is that a laughable thought? It's because we have created that space. We've created it. We've done it.
So, Eric, one of the things that we've talked about this season is that we don't just want to be shining a light onto things that aren't good and then leaving. We actually want to talk about solutions. So we got about 10 minutes left. How do we fix this?
We got all the time in the world, buddy. We can do whatever we want.
The listenership's at say otherwise.
Okay,
so
right.
how do we fix this and make the church the place that you're talking about? I'm going to answer that first because I think the biggest piece surrounding this is our language. Because the words we say matter.
Yep.
Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words are going to hurt me even more. And I still remember things said to me when I was a child that hurt. And I guarantee you people who are in this situation can point to the person who said the thing that made them cry, that made them feel unsafe. I said earlier, but calling people baby murderers doesn't make them want to come to church. So the first step I would say is we got to change the way we talk about this entire, I don't even want to call it a debate, but we have to change the way we talk about the abortion topic as a whole. If we want to make any progress in helping women feel safer around us and inside the church, we have to change the language we use. And that starts by changing our heart towards people who are involved in that situation, because as scripture tells us, out of our heart are the words that flow. So the words that we're saying represent how we feel about people. And so if we're calling them baby murderers, and I'm sorry for saying that over and over, that represents something inside of us that we feel. So for our language to change, our heart has to change first. We have to see the people in this situation as human beings in need of the comfort of the Holy Spirit, of God the Father, of Jesus Christ, because they are going through one of the toughest times of their entire life, and they need the love, care, and kindness that comes with Jesus. And if we cannot see them as that, our language will never change.
Yeah. I was watching on social media the other day. They were talking about it was a big scandal that came out about a company that two people were talking in the airport. They were talking about what to do about a particular employee, and somebody else recorded that conversation. And they were like, "Oh, just flabbergasted that this conversation would happen in being recorded secretly or in public or whatever." And it's like, man, I would encourage church leaders, if whatever conversation you're having, this is a good time to check it, and not necessarily, again, to just change your words, but if you are going into certain environments, whether it's the green room or the volunteer room or the staff offices or, your men's group, and you wouldn't want that to be recorded and displayed for your entire church, there's something wrong. I mean, obviously there are certain situations out, right? Confidentiality issues. But what lawyers would say all the time is like, never text anything that you wouldn't want read aloud in a monotone voice during a deposition. It's like, if something like that happens, or if there's conversations happening on your staff, somebody needs to be the adult in the room and stand up and say, hey, you know what? I don't think that that's appropriate. Not just the things that we're saying here, but the intent behind it is sending the
Not
wrong
just the
message.
adult in the room. Someone needs to represent Jesus in the room.
Right, exactly. Like, how many times has it happened to you? I know it's happened to me where it's like we had the church culture says one thing, and then in the staff meeting we say something else. Church culture says one thing, but in the text group chat it says something else. Church culture says one thing, but in the green room in between services or in the volunteer room we're saying this about someone or something or the other. And it's like, man, that is tough. And I think it's especially tough in our political season where you have churches that are like, we do not want, I came from one of these too, where it's like, we do not want to be politicizing the pulpit. Sure. But then as soon as you walk around the staff offices, the lead pastor's saying this or that, right? Or, people are going back and forth, or on Facebook, they're doing this and that. It's like, it's not just about the words that you use. To go back to what you said, Jonathan, it's like, it's not just about the words that you use. It's if those words give you pause, don't just change the words. Investigate what's going on in your heart that needs to change. And don't wait until something happens where, you have all of a sudden become really, really close to the issue where it's got to change for you. Because that's similar to, right, where I think your story is similar to this and others, where it's like, if you've grown up with a raging alcoholic, that's going to change your opinion on alcohol. All of a sudden, if you have a heart attack and now that's the one thing that's going to change your diet, or whatever it happens to be, or you stop smoking because of it, it's like, don't get to that point. We would say the same thing about sin. It's like, don't go all the way to the edge and figure out how close you can get. It's like, that's not, you preach that. So live that when it comes to creating safety, emotional safety for people in your church to talk about anything that could be tough.
I also think a part of this, the part of changing our heart, is getting out of our fundamentalist and evangelical bubbles and doing the actual research so that we can understand what women and their partners experience leading up to and following an abortion. If we can try to understand someone's situation, we can care for them with love and empathy instead of judgment. But it takes us trying to understand. It takes us setting aside our assumptions.
And not demonizing. That's the other thing, is like, it takes us not demonizing the other side. So name whatever, I'm not going to split hairs on what is and isn't sin here at this point, but like, name whatever sin issue you're talking about. When I do it, I just made a mistake. When you do it, you're an evil sinner, right? When something happens to me or my family or the people I care about, man, that was a mistake, or that was something, or God's love covers all. When it happens to you, think about all the different things, right? Oh, you're using it as healthcare. Oh, you just want your excuse to go and do whatever you want, whenever you want. You're just a welfare queen. You're just think about all of the different derogatory terminology that we use for the others. But when it happens to us or people around us, it was a mistake, or I was given into temptation, or I was in a moment of weakness, or name whatever else. Why don't you give that same level of grace and consideration to others?
Yeah. And I don't know why this story just popped in my head, but I want to go with it. I want to share it just because I feel like I should. That ministry I was talking about earlier, it's called Deeper Still. But one of the stories they've shared, I think it might be on their website right now. I'm not 100% sure. I remember seeing this probably 7, 8 years ago, but it was with a man who had gone to one of their retreats. And he told the story of how he had gotten his girlfriend pregnant back in college. So this would have been in the 70s after Roe was passed. And at the time, girlfriend got an abortion. And this man's probably, and this was 2012, 2013. So, I mean, this is 40 years later, 30, 40 years later. So I mean, my timeline may be off, so forgive me. But he told the story, he would have dreams that he got to heaven and he's meeting all of his family members and all the ones who had gone before him. And he's so excited that he gets to see these people again. And then there's this girl that walks up to him, young woman at that point in time, like 20 something years old, 30 something years old. And he's like, "Hey, I'm sorry, but I don't know who you are." And in the dream, it's, "Oh, I was the baby that from college, the one that you got an abortion for." And he said he would wake up and go between tears and just like sheer anxiety, like shaking, trembling, because that's his feeling. And what I came to find out was that is a very common feeling for people who have gone through that situation. And I don't know that that feeling is driven, if it's driven by guilt, if it's driven by shame, if it's driven by like you feel like you're missing something because it sticks with you. I don't know. Like, I don't know where that feeling comes from. I've never experienced it myself, so I can't go there. But what I do know is that Jesus offers healing and hope and forgiveness of that feeling. And it is our job as Christians not to enhance that feeling for the person who is feeling it, but instead to show the love, acceptance, grace, and forgiveness and healing of Jesus to them so that they can experience that from him themselves. And the language that cultural Christianity has used around this topic enhances the shame. It enhances the guilt. It enhances all of the negative emotions. And for us as Christians, if we want to live in the tension between all of this stuff around us, I'm not even going to pick one or two sides of this. If we want to live in this tension, we have to be able to look at people who maybe we thought they did something they shouldn't have done. Maybe we don't agree with their decision that they made. But we hold Jesus to a higher level than anyone else's actions. And so we need to be the people that hold their hand and takes them to Jesus so that he can give them the hug, so that he can say, "My child, I forgive you. Go and sin no more," or whatever it might be. We've got to be those people. To the church leaders listening, if that is not the culture of the people inside your church, you have work to do. It's hard. They're being discipled by Fox News and online commentators who claim to be Christians who could be further from a follow or a representation of Jesus. That's who they're reading and seeing every day. So your job is not easy. Like the Christian nationalist a-hole pastor on Twitter, they're reading his stuff more than they're reading from you. But those people are your sheep, and you have to lead them well. And what leaders do in moderation, their followers do in excess. So if you can model the love, the grace, the forgiveness, and the acceptance of Jesus to your body in this situation, eventually they're going to follow you or they're going to leave. And you have to be okay with fewer people coming to your church in response to you loving people like Jesus. Like, I know that sounds strange, but I also know what the numbers matter to you.
Yep.
And so there's some heart work there that has to be done of, okay, we got 50 less people coming to our church, but you know what? The abortion wounded woman and man, they feel comfortable at my church. They feel loved at my church. They feel safe at my church.
Yep.
And I would hope you would make that trade every day and twice on Sunday.
It's not
But
easy.
for us to represent Jesus, that's what we got to do.
It's not easy. And I mean, I know right now, I mean, some of you are thinking, but the biggest donor in our church is the biggest Let's Go Brandon guy, right? The big, the loudest voice on our board is posting, Joe and the Ho memes. It's tough. It's tough. You still have to lead those people. And I think this season especially, but there's going to be something in your life that's going to expose, am I here because I want to lead a church, or am I here because I want to follow Jesus? And take church out of it. Am I here because I want to lead an institution? Am I here because I want to support whatever? I mean, that's cultural Christianity. That's what we're talking about. Am I a cultural Christian? Or am I someone that wants to grow closer and emulate Christ?
For the rest of us who aren't leading a church, who are just leading everyday lives, only 7% of the women who had an abortion felt comfortable talking to anyone inside their church. It's our job to change that. We are the ones who they need to be talking to. Maybe they don't feel comfortable with the pastor. Okay, sure, whatever. But they better be comfortable talking to us. And if they're not, that's on us. That's our fault. And if we truly want to love people like Jesus, we have to meet them where they are. We have to show them love and acceptance where they are right now before we even consider talking about anything that they may have done wrong. We have to show them the unconditional love of Jesus. If we can do that, then maybe they'll feel safe enough to talk to us. But the words we say in person, the things we post online, and the jokes we make with our friends, that impacts a lot, because you never know who's gone through something. You never know. Like I have friends who I text routinely who I didn't know till months later they had a miscarriage, or they had something that happened from a pregnancy. Maybe they wanted the baby. They were thrilled, and then something happened and they had to make a decision. You never know what's going on with someone else. So the words you say absolutely 100% matter. And it's on us to make sure people feel safe inside the church and around other Christians.
That needs to be repeated. The level of safety that people feel in your church is not their responsibility. That's your responsibility.
It's up to us. That's it for this week. Next week, we'll be back looking at how a core piece of evangelical training meant to impact the culture has actually led to a very negative feeling about the church and Christians as a whole. If you want to get that episode when it first comes out, subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app if you haven't already. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to reach out to us on social or send us an email to continue the conversation. Eric is at EricW712 on all the major platforms. I am at Jonathan_Caron on them as well. If you want to email us, you can send that to hello@tensionpodcast.com. If you like the show, do us a favor and rate us and review us wherever you get podcasts. Share the episode with a friend if you found it helpful. As always, thanks for making us a part of your day, and we'll talk to you again next week. And we'll also see if Eric's still number one next week. Have a great week, everybody.
Bye.